and welcome to this morning's presentation of Mobility for All, Expansion into the North American Market. The purpose of this presentation is to provide information on expanding Mobility for All's products into the American market. The following information is the things that Mobility for All needs to take into consideration before moving their product into the United States. In the United States, there are about 2.7 million people who use wheelchairs. As people are getting older, specifically the baby boomer generation, which is one of the largest population groups the world has ever seen, they're getting older and they need a little bit more help getting around. More specifically, they need help from the wheelchairs. And there are many big businesses and corporations that are in need for these wheelchairs, like airports, hospitals, and assisted living communities. There are a little bit more than 5,000 airports, and each averaging about 700 wheelchairs per location. There are 6,146 hospitals in the United States, each averaging 500 wheelchairs in their possession. And there are just about 29,000 assisted living communities in the United States, each averaging about 200 wheelchairs in their possession. This means that there is a little over 9 million wheelchairs in use in the United States by these companies. And if you include people that just have wheelchairs and not through one of these big businesses, that puts our number at a little more than 12 million wheelchairs in the United States. Therefore, the market for this type of product, a connector which could connect these wheelchairs, is a very good thing. We need to have a product like this in the United States because there are so many people who need wheelchairs and so many wheelchairs in use. In places like airports and hospitals, this product could be a game changer in allowing people to move around and lessening wait times in hospitals and airports and making everything just move a little bit smoother. In the United States, there are some competitors for this product. Power wheelchair companies such as 21st Century Scientific Incorporated and Autobac Healthcare dominate the world stage. However, companies like Invacare Corp also have stakes in other aspects of the mobility field, like split spring beds, microprocessor controlled power wheelchairs, and home oxygen systems. Other American companies like Pride Mobility work from their headquarters in Pennsylvania and other locations globally to allow people the best accessibility possible by working in tandem with rehabilitation companies, manufacturing mobility technologies, and manufacturing home mobility technologies like lift chairs and scooters. Needless to say, there are some competitors walking in for Mobility for All in the United States. However, it is important to note that there is not a similar product being made by these companies, such as the connector for Mobility for All. In the US, there are a number of safety requirements when manufacturing wheelchairs and other devices. All of these requirements must be met from an engineering standpoint to allow mass manufacturing and the sale of the device. Specifically, the wheelchair must be storable, must be weight-bearing, and it must be adjustable. Wheelchairs must be easy to be stored because of the necessity for them everywhere around the world. They're used in airports and hospitals, and there could be hundreds that need to be stored. Or if a person just wants to get on the bus and needs to fold up their wheelchair to sit comfortably under the seat, the wheelchair needs to be able to do that. So that is something that engineers need to take into consideration when building these products. Wheelchairs also must be able to bear a certain amount of weight as not to collapse when in use and cause harm to the person in the wheelchair. That means that it has to be reliable and it has to be strong enough to be weight-bearing. Also, the wheelchair needs to be adjustable and needs to be designed in the case of maneuvering through difficult areas and public spaces. When moving a foreign product into the American market, one really important thing that needs to be considered is the ADA regulations. According to the ADA, when assessing factors that decide whether a product like a wheelchair can be accommodated in a particular facility, there are certain things that need to be considered, such as the type, size, weight, dimension, and speed of the device, as well as the facility's volume of pedestrian traffic, the facility's design and operational characteristics, whether legitimate safety requirements can be established to permit safe operations of a wheelchair, or whether the use of that wheelchair creates substantial risk or harm to the environment or cultural or natural resources. So one thing in particular that Mobility for All needs to look out for is if their foreign product meets these ADA regulations. When attempting to introduce a new and foreign product in the US market, meeting American accommodations could prove to be a setback, impacting the market as a whole from gaining new technologies from abroad or even upstarting companies domestically. This is because, say, these regulations don't exist in Germany or France, but then you try to move this product into the United States, you could be barred from selling this type of product because it does not follow the ADA regulations. It would be advantageous to advertise products along with a compatible wheelchair, so the consumer would have little extra work to do as possible when trying to use and find this product. The product should be distributed across the US in places competitors sell their products, so wheelchair stores and places where you sell wheelchair accessories. As far as contracts go, agreements could be made with care facilities to provide discounts on the products, and that would prove to be a great place to sell your product because people that use wheelchairs are right there. So they're going to be in need of these products, and you can just make a deal with care facilities, hospitals, airports, places like that to sell your product right there. It would also be really advantageous to get in with online retailers. That way the product can be delivered right to the customer's door, especially if they are having issues with mobility and they are disabled. It might be really, really easy for you to sell your product to them, and then they don't have to go to a store, and you can just bring it right to their door. Specifically, we think it would be really important to maybe get in with places like Amazon. Selling specifically on Amazon would enable the use of incredible shipping speeds, like overnight or 2-day shipping, that Amazon is really well known for. So as far as marketing goes, there are some targeting do's and don'ts. We think it would be important to start in the United States when advertising. You could use things like TV, social media, to really just get this in front of the American people. The advertising campaign for Mobility for All's products should begin in the United States by targeting companies as well that provide wheelchairs to those with disabilities. However, we do need to be careful as to not offend anybody. Targeting the people who require wheelchairs may come across as inappropriate, and the people using the wheelchair products may be slightly offended because of it. This means that we need to focus in more on hospitals and care facilities and create a face-to-face relationship with these people so they can in turn give the product a recommendation to their patients. Also, and not in every case will you be right in front of the person who's going to need the wheelchair, like in airports. So it's really good to create a good relationship and gain connections with representatives at airports and hospitals and care facilities. We do believe that the product name should stay the same because Mobility for All sounds like a company that is willing to help people, and we find that very, very important. Therefore, just to reiterate, we feel that we should target companies that provide the wheelchairs, not the wheelchair users. And this is incredibly important when creating good relationships with sellers and buyers in the United States. After the additional sale, some steps need to be taken to continue revenue, and there are many ways we can work to continue the revenue stream. Considering some of our clients will be bigger hospitals and airports, setting up a monthly payment plan with these larger companies to offset the hefty bill will allow for a more consistent flow of income for Mobility for All. Additionally, Mobility for All could set up a maintenance service with technicians that could be sent to fix issues with the product, which opens up a new window for possible revenue streams. Also, partnering or co-signing with a similar company in the United States could allow Mobility for All to work in tandem and exchange favors for ongoing referrals. It would also be important to establish multiple lines of revenue for Mobility for All, meaning having multiple contacts with multiple airports, hospitals, and nursing homes would prove to be important. Additionally, being in contact with the companies that employ caregivers would be important, because those caregivers could then offer the product to their own patients. When financing, the company should take the advertising market and marketing method that we described in previous slides, meaning we need to maintain face-to-face relationships. The face-to-face approach with representatives of Mobility for All and companies that provide wheelchairs should be taken, and we feel that this will allow the company to grow. But we need to focus on the growth in Europe first. The company should wait to incorporate in the US market until it has grown large enough that it has a name in the European market, and then we can attract investors. Mobility for All needs to attract investors by showing its growth in the European market and shows that the company has some experience, so investors would be more likely to lend their money, and it shows that the company has some experience. Gaining experience as a company can attract many investors, and the product will be successful in the US market. In the United States, power-operated vehicles like scooters and manual wheelchairs are covered under Medicare Part B, and it is important to take this into consideration when selling these products. However, some Americans also use private insurance. Like Medicare, private U.S. insurance covers wheelchairs under certain qualifications, and it is important to note that a lot of times these qualifications mean that your doctor has to be enrolled in Medicare, the seller of the wheelchair has to be involved in Medicare, your wheelchair has to be prescribed by a doctor. And even then, if you have insurance, buying a wheelchair can be incredibly expensive. On average, private insurance and government programs typically cover between 50 and 80% of the costs. And additionally, those without insurance could find themselves having a really hard time paying for a wheelchair that they could need. A manual wheelchair can cost an average of $500, but a power wheelchair can have an average cost of about $7,000. This is something to take into consideration because considering that the connector device is a European product and that a lot of European countries have free healthcare, maybe the translation of the connector won't really be seen as highly in the United States market because it will be seen as expensive and maybe something frivolous that we don't really need, because in Europe they can afford to make these kinds of calls because their healthcare is free. In the United States, that's not always the case. As far as deciding on a United States price, the best material for building this kind of product would be to use an aluminum material. This would ensure a good quality product that would match the style of the wheelchairs to make it visually appealing. Mobility for All has a baseline number of €100 per unit for a metal 3D print. Converting that to US dollars would be about $119. Now, an average net profit margin is about 10%, and a good net profit margin is about 20%. Let's say Mobility for All wants a 15% profit margin, and the cost of production is $119 US. That would make the selling price at about $140 here in the United States. However, this would not include shipping, handling, or packaging. The estimated shipping cost from FedEx could be about $60 for a 10-pound box using their packaging. That number could either be included in the price as a fixed rate, or shipping could be based on miles, offering customers closer to the factory cheaper prices and those farther away more expensive prices. This would put a United States total for the connector device at about $200. Considering that shipping this kind of product could create higher costs for consumers in the United States, we believe it would be advantageous for Mobility for All if the products were manufactured here in the United States. Not only would this allow us to avoid tariffs that are placed on imported products, but it would also solve the problem of shipping across national borders and the extra precautions that would have to be taken for that route. We think it would be important to also avoid some sea custom fees. Custom fees for ocean travel are $491 for each product that enters the United States, which could be a huge financial burden on Mobility for All. There are also air custom fees, and shipping there is about $315 for each product that enters the U.S. However, shipping throughout the U.S. could be handled by trains and trucks, which has a lower cost than shipping by air and sea. Now, we would have to get a manufacturing license, and agreements can be made with manufacturers in the U.S. to manufacture the product without any involvement of Mobility for All. That way it's a little bit cheaper. In short, the American market is primed and ready to take on Mobility for All's product, and the points discussed today would allow Mobility for All to expand across the Atlantic to provide their services to those in the United States. We think that it would be important for Mobility for All to consider the points discussed today, and if they are able to take these into consideration, the United States market will be definitely ready to take in the connector product, and we think that the American people and those who require mobility assistance would be greatly appreciative of a product like Mobility for All's. We thank you for your time and attention, and we hope that this was educational.